how my intuition guided me to moving to so many different places in my life. And I'll begin with my childhood. I actually didn't move at all during my childhood. My parents still, to this day, live in the same house. And I didn't have my first move until I was 20 years old. So I moved out of my hometown when I was 20, and I moved to Toronto to have my first full-time job for a whole year. I'd done full-time work in the summer before and been a camp counselor, but other than that, I hadn't really had a real full-time job before, and I'd never lived in Toronto before. And so that was my first move that I was guided to make. And when I was moving to Toronto, the interesting thing that happened was I was checking out these different room rentals for students, and a lot of them were really dark. They felt very dirty. They didn't feel like good places to live. But where I ended up moving was this house in North York. It wasn't in the downtown core of Toronto. I found this really beautiful house, and it felt very filled with light, very clean. And something about it made me feel comfortable right away. And the interesting thing was that I was a new vegetarian, and I found out that the people who were living in that house were also vegetarian. And so my intuition pulled me to them in order to find like-minded people that I could live with in harmony and really thrive in Toronto at that time of my life. And then I was able to stay in my internship for a whole year before going back to university. So I went back to my hometown to finish university, and I was guided to take on a graduate degree, which I did. And then my next guided move was to Edmonton, Alberta, and that came out of the blue. I'd applied to many jobs in Ontario. I did have a job at the time in my hometown, but it was a contract and it was coming to an end. And I applied to a ton of jobs in Ontario and one on a whim in Edmonton, just one. And that was the one that I got out of the whole chunk that I'd applied to when I was young. And I just had a feeling that I was supposed to be in Edmonton, even though I didn't know that much about it. I didn't know that many people. My mom's best friend lived there. Having said that, I didn't really know too many people except acquaintances that my friends knew from Toronto, but even they didn't know their acquaintances over there very well. And so I just leaned into it and I moved, and it was very cold. It was a very difficult place to live at first. Having said that, I got the hang of it and I actually really started to like it. You know, Alberta grows on you. There's something about it that's so quiet and peaceful, and the weather is dry and there's fewer bugs and animals to worry about, although there are moose over there and bison, but there's just something very peaceful about living there, even though it's very cold. And I loved it, and I stayed there for 3.5 years. And then I started getting the feeling that I needed to move again. And I thought at first it was maybe to Calgary or another city in Alberta, and I was trying in those places, and it wasn't happening. And then I applied to this random job in a very small town, only 10,000 people. And again, it's like story of my life. It's like the one outlier position that I apply for that I just have a feeling it might be a good fit for me. I ended up getting, and then I ended up living in a very small town with just 10,000 people in it. So that was a very different experience for me in Alberta. It's one thing to live in Edmonton where there are a lot of different kinds of people there, but it's another to live in a very small town in Alberta. You really get the feeling for the culture in Alberta when you live in a smaller town as to a bigger city where there's all kinds of people there. Although that's a part of Alberta too. It's a different experience. Having said that, I later got the feeling that I needed to move back to Ontario. I didn't go back to my hometown at first, and that was a very difficult intuitive decision because Alberta felt like home to me at that point. And my ego wanted to stay in Alberta, but my intuition told me to go. And I was really distraught the whole time. I was very upset moving across the country with my cat. And I just thought that I was making a huge mistake the whole time. I was questioning it intellectually and upset emotionally. Having said that, even though the place I was moving to I wasn't super thrilled about, I just had this feeling I was supposed to be back in Ontario. And as it turns out, the economy at that time was crashing. I don't want to say too much about the timing of it or the politics of it. There were some involved. But anyway, I moved back to Ontario and things started to get kind of good again, but not too secure. I'd been out of Ontario for so long that basically it felt foreign to me too. And people were looking at my license plate from Alberta and thinking all kinds of judgments and thoughts about me from coming from there. And then that job didn't really work out the way that I'd hoped. So I moved all my stuff back into my parents' home. And then after a while, I'd been working out and working on myself and developing a business. I decided to move to New Zealand. And when I moved to New Zealand, that was also a very intuitive impulse. I did not know that there were jobs there that were right for me or that I was even qualified to go. I'm realizing my affinity in New Zealand was very similar to my affinity in Alberta. And both of those places have very beautiful mountains too. So what happened was I ended up going to the bigger city at first in Auckland and working for a school there, developing their social media, which aligned with the business I had been working on back in Ontario. And then I moved to the Lord of the Rings movie site and ended up working there. And the interesting thing about that was I called my bank back from Canada when I was living there and explained to them what I was doing because I couldn't do online banking that easily, so I had to do it all over the phone. And the funny thing about that was all the workers at the bank would get very jealous of my job and my ability to live in New Zealand. And they couldn't manifest that for themselves because they were living for their pure intellect. That was the only way they knew how to advance and get jobs and find security and comfort in their income was through their minds. And there's nothing wrong with using your mind. It's just that you can't manifest unique opportunities to travel and see different places and live your dreams when you're living purely from your mind. You're going to purely live from logic, right? And then what ended up happening, I thought that I was going to stay in New Zealand permanently, but I actually was wrong. A lot of things didn't work out, and that caused me to go back to Ontario, where I was guided to go from Alberta in the first place. How do you know that you are meant to move to a new place? How do you know that it's not just a dream inside your head that's never going to manifest, or if it's something that's real? And the way that you know that you are meant to move to a new place is that the doors will open to you. It's like what they say in Hawaii. They say, if you're meant to be on the island will open its doors for you. And if you're not meant to be there, it won't open its doors to you. And I believe that's the same in any place that you're hoping to move to. It will have an opportunity, the doors will open, you'll find an affordable place to live, and that can happen even in very expensive places. In fact, it's happened for me in Ontario. The prices have skyrocketed here, but I have found affordable places to live and been quite comfortable in spite of the fact that the real estate market is going crazy in this province. So you can really do whatever your intuition is guiding you towards, and the path will reveal itself as long as you're committed to that path. And if you're not meant to live in a certain place, the doors will actually close. That's what happened to me eventually in New Zealand too. The insurance didn't work out when I was trying to rebook my flight. I lost my housing, and all of a sudden I just had to move. I just had to go, and I had days to do it and get everything settled very, very fast. I was meant to have this really cool experience in New Zealand, but I wasn't meant to stay there forever. And I believe our intuition works a lot in that way. Our intellectual mind wants this secure place for the rest of our lives. We want our comfort zone. We want to do it once and have it be good and never have to do it again. But the truth is, our intuition updates from time to time, and when it updates, you may have to start all over again from scratch. And that's just part of living with your intuition. And even if you live purely from intellect and you ignore your intuition, usually the universe will start sending you louder and louder signs when you're meant to change. And eventually you have to go along with the change. Intuition just makes the process of going with change a little bit easier and a little bit more magical. And that's how moving to different places with your intuition works in your life.